put it all together. We've got a war in Iran. We've got a spike, at least for now, 8-day spike in energy prices. We've got AI disruption concerns. We've got cracks in private credit, and we have a weaker jobs report. How do you invest right now?
Buy Bitcoin.
I got it. That's what it is. Hey, where are you at with it, Anthony?
Well, listen, it's my largest position by far. I've added to the position recently in the correction. I do believe that Bitcoin is going to be a big operating layer, like your former guest, Michael Saylor, who wrote the foreword to my book about Bitcoin. And I'll just say two quick things. When we move into agentic AI and a computer is not, for regulatory reasons, able to open up a bank account somewhere, guess what the computer is going to do? It's going to figure out a way to trade on the blockchain and use things like Bitcoin. And so don't underestimate the power of this. Moreover, in a decentralized society where we're losing our trust in fiat currencies, I think Bitcoin as a store of value or a potential layer of value that we transact with is going higher. And it's a very limited supply. And forget about you and me. I'm talking about kids that are my kids' ages. As they go 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and they start running the big money, this is going to be a very big asset. So is it a $35 trillion asset like gold, trading at $1.5 trillion right now? I believe it is.
Crypto speech was a big hit. And I know a lot of smart people love crypto. I know some smart people actually have reservations about it.
Sure.
For our audience, can you just kind of make the case for crypto and people who have, concerns and quite frankly don't even understand it? There are a lot of folks out there. I know a lot of people own it, but
yeah, of course. So look, I'm an owner of Bitcoin here, but I'm also the vice president of the United States. So I want to be careful, but I think the core value proposition of cryptocurrency is that it's a way of transacting and a way of storing value in a modern digital age. Look, 100 years ago, if you wanted to go and buy something, you put a dollar bill on the table, you put a gold coin on the table. The value proposition of Bitcoin is that it can serve the same function, but in a digital age, a way that's secure, that's safer from fraud, that allows people to buy and sell and store value, but in a way that's consistent with the modern technological age that we live in. Now, having said that, I fully accept there are risks to all of these things. There are always risks to new technologies. Our approach in the Trump administration is to say, let people innovate. Let people figure this stuff out on their own. If the critics of Bitcoin are right, I happen to think that they're wrong. That will eventually win out in the marketplace. If the advocates of Bitcoin are right, and I happen to agree with them, if they make their case, that's eventually going to win out in the marketplace. What you shouldn't have is a dictatorial government that tells certain industries they're not allowed to do what they need to do. You've got to let people make these decisions on their own. And that's sort of been our approach. We want common sense regulatory regimes. We want to allow the cryptocurrency industry to participate in the mainstream of the economy. But then ultimately, the laws of economics, the laws of supply and demand are going to make the determinations from there.
And hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, where we explore the craziest stories, wild ideas, and things you won't believe are real. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Let's jump right in. Today, we are talking about the Iran war and Bitcoin. Because when most people think about war, they think about missiles and maps and generals and oil, fields, and very serious men in rooms, pretending to be in control of events that clearly stopped being controllable about 3 bad decisions ago. But what people do not think of first, and probably should, is money. Because if you didn't know, war is one of the most efficient monetary demolition mechanisms ever invented. And that is important for Bitcoin. We know that the moment a serious conflict begins, the state's financial mask starts to slip. Everybody gets patriotic. Everyone starts waving their flag. Everyone gives speeches about resolve and freedom and destiny. And then 5 minutes later, the government opens Microsoft Excel, and then they look at the actual bill. And then they realize that they're about to finance civilization's latest moral emergency with more debt, more inflation, and accounting fraud that is so spiritually advanced it should qualify as performance art. And that is the real opening act here, because war is not fought just with soldiers. Is it any coincidence that the deadliest century in human history also happened to coincide with the money printer? When? You can print more money. You can fund more war. And that is the state of reality because war is funded through sovereign balance sheets. It's funded through treasury issuance, deficit, expansion, and central bank distortion of our money. And then you have the energy repricing that always happens. And then you have the gradual debasement of every single innocent saver in the Bassus. Country who thought that cash in their bank meant safety instead of silent participation in a national liquidity, sacrifice ritual. And that is where Bitcoin becomes impossible to ignore because every single war, no matter where it is on the globe, it all reveals the exact same truth. State money is only as strong as the political system issuing it. And political systems always get very weird when the bombs start to fly and oil routes get militarized. And then all of a sudden, all of the old assumptions start to crack. Bonds don't feel sacred anymore. The currency doesn't feel as stable and settlement doesn't feel as natural. The entire machine just starts to vibrate like a shopping cart with one bad wheel still moving forward somehow, but making a bond. Sound that tells you something important is breaking underneath and into that. Chaos walks Bitcoin because a lot of people are seeing this latest war as just a military event. They're watching the AI-generated videos of the missiles dropping, but this is a monetary event. It is a huge capital markets event. It is an energy event, and it is a credibility event. And once you see it this way, you're going to stop asking the childish question of, is this good for Bitcoin today or good for Bitcoin this week? You start to ask the adult question, what happens to money itself when the world gets more violent, more indebted, more unstable, and more desperate for neutral collateral that cannot be controlled by a government? That is the real story. And Bitcoin is sitting right in the middle of it. The market spent the last 10 days doing exactly what the modern markets do best, trying to price a war through presidential mood swings on Twitter. We're getting these half confirmed battlefield updates and the spiritual guidance of traders who would absolutely sell their grandmother for a 2-day rally on the NASDAQ. And that's what makes this phase that we're in so incredibly fascinating because Trump's public commentary has effectively become a live macro input. This is proven time and time again. If you guys remember the one tweet about China tariffs that tanked the crypto market on October 10th. But anyway, before we get into that, February 28th, we saw a synchronized strike wave of American Israeli forces. 1,000 plus targets hit in 24 hours. The supreme leader was killed. His son has been elevated. So that tells us there's more of a regime, continuity, not capitulation. And Trump himself said that he was not happy with this appointment. And then earlier this month, we just saw continued strikes from American Israeli forces. And then on March 10th, the Pentagon designated that the heaviest bombing day so far. Up to 150 U.S. troops were wounded. And then that's when the oil infrastructure started to hit panic mode. And just across the last 4 days, this is really when we start to see the panic in the faces oil market. So one day the messaging from Trump is overwhelming force, total escalation, language designed to make Iran sound like one bad afternoon away from biblical extinction. And then a few days later, the tone just starts to shift toward progress, closure, momentum. Maybe this thing wraps up faster than expected. Maybe the operation is already far ahead of schedule. And then, surprise, surprise, the market hears what it wants to hear. It hears war ending soon. Maybe we're a few weeks ahead, and then they immediately started to throw a little cocktail party for risk assets. Oil pulled back 30% after rising 30% the day prior. Stocks started to breathe a little bit. The traders out there, they started to act like they survived the whole thing, even though the missiles are still flying overhead. shipping lanes are obviously still under pressure. And the military is publicly saying the heaviest bombing is still ahead. Yet, because of a Trump tweet, he's just playing the markets like they are a fiddle. And that gap between rhetoric and reality really is the entire game. And I'm not going to lie, I do find it kind of entertaining. I'm as anti-war as the next guy. I'm just saying because markets love resolution. It's interesting that they love the resolution, even though there's almost no evidence that resolution exists. They crave the narrative. They're craving the story that is restoring order. Okay? They want to believe that the end spreadsheet can go back to normal. We are witnessing a huge global marketplace, really moving away from fundamentals and into narratives. These people want to believe that the inflation scare can just cool off. Inflation is temporary. The consumer can just continue to spend. We can continue to service our national debt. And the machinery of debt-fueled Western life can just return to its usual programming. How comforting. But war does not care about the emotional needs of portfolio managers. War has its own logic, its own ability to humiliate anyone trying to trade it with a clean little narrative and a 6-hour time horizon. So, what we have seen with Iran so far is a conflict that opened with a lot of shock and awe. Obviously, that's the style, the decapitation level, leadership risk, deep strikes against military infrastructure, retaliation across the region, rising casualties, threats around the Strait of Hormuz as well as the constant stream of messaging from Washington that keeps trying to project control over something that is clearly larger than one press cycle. And that matters for money and markets, because confidence continues to break in layers. First is confidence in the forecast, then confidence in the policy, and then confidence in the durability of the old financial assumptions. And that is where Bitcoin starts to creep back into the conversation, because Bitcoin doesn't need a Pentagon press conference. It doesn't need a cabinet league. It doesn't need a carefully massaged statement about operational success, does it? It just sits there globally, tradable, politically neutral, available every single hour of the day, watching the world continue to relearn over and over again that state power and monetary credibility are always more fragile than they look on television. So now it's time to talk about when war stops being a headline and starts becoming a bill, because every single missile that is launched or ship rerouted, every dot lower, refinery that's threatened, every base reinforced. All of these things always arrive in the same place, don't they? They arrive on the balance sheet. And balance sheets really have a way of siphoning the romance out of war and geopolitics. It's one thing to go on television and talk about resolve, but it's another thing to fund that resolve. While energy prices continue to spike, borrowing needs rise, supply chains tighten, and inflation starts creeping back into the room like some guy that everyone thought got kicked out of the brain. Party forever. And that is always the transmission mechanism, isn't it? Is harvesting your life force to pay for the war. This happens time and time again. War hits oil when it's in the faith. Middle East especially, and then oil always hits inflation expectations. Then, obviously, inflation hits bonds, and then bonds hit financial conditions, and then financial conditions hit absolutely everything. And once that chain starts moving, the market has a serious problem, because it has to figure out whether sovereign debt is still a place of safety or just the financing arm of an increasingly expensive imperialistic habit. And that's why this conflict matters far beyond the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz is not some obscure geography quiz question. It is one of the most important energy checkpoints in all of planet Earth. The second traders start to worry about the disruption. The whole pricing structure of modern industrial life starts to twitch when Oil goes up, transportation costs go up, input costs go up, inflation assumptions rise, and central banks suddenly look less like the wise stewards of stability, and they start to look more like exhausted casino managers trying to keep the lights on while the roulette wheel just caught fire. And then bonds get dragged into it because bonds live on trust. Trust in fiscal discipline, trust that the sovereign government is going to be there in the next 50 years. There's a reason why some fiat currencies can print more than others. It comes from authority. Just saying. But the point is that every single major fiat asset sits downstream from political decision-making, doesn't it? Bitcoin sits outside of the room entirely. No emergency summit can print more Bitcoin. There is no treasury department diluting Bitcoin, no central bank scheduling a conference call, and then discovering, wow, 12 more units of Bitcoin showed up right after lunch. So as the cost of war continues to leak into oil, inflation, bonds, and fiscal credibility itself, Bitcoin becomes more intellectually compelling. And that is why Bitcoin has shown more resilience than gold, than silver, than the S&P 500. Ever since this war broke out, there's a lot of theories out there. Are the wealthy in the Middle East shoveling their money into an asset that can't be seized? Look at the price of Bitcoin down. The Iranian currency over the last 6 months, it's almost like it's more rational, and you're incentivized to store value in an asset that cannot be confiscated or seized by some sovereign government. Is it really surprising that we're starting to see Bitcoin act less like some speculative sideshow asset and more like a monetary asset with unusually good manners in a world that's behaving very badly? Just look at the rundown of the assets. Look at oil, spiking above $100 per barrel. It was up 29% intraday on Monday, and then it immediately reversed back down to $87 per barrel. Gold had a slight sell-off on Monday, slight rebound on Tuesday, but even then it's underperformed Bitcoin since the beginning of the war, just like equities and, of course, the dollar itself. We continue to see such incredible volatility in commodities. It seems like the world's not even agreeing. In the traditional stores of value, in the last 30 days, silver is considerably more volatile than Bitcoin. Yes, silver. So the cross-asset message here is very extraordinary right now. Oil is pricing in the physical disruption. Obviously, gold continues to price fear, at least price fear among the boomers who are buying gold after a Sean Hannity episode. And then you have the dollar continue to price in the scrambling liquidity. Stocks are pricing the presidential mood swings that are happening on Twitter. And Bitcoin is pricing both liquidation and the BOC, long-term monetary doubt of everything, at the exact same time. Can someone freeze it, inflate it, seize it, or delay it? Well, this is where Bitcoin becomes uniquely powerful. Obviously, gold is strong, but it is heavy. Try to get a $100 million of gold across borders during wartime. Have fun with that. Dollars are liquid, but they're inside the system. And bank deposits work until the system decides that they work more slowly than you would prefer. And you've had a checking account. You know how that is. But Bitcoin just gives people something different, and war reminds us that this is a human necessity of fixed supply, global transferability, 24/7 liquidity, self-custody, and final settlement, without asking a state, a bank, or a military alliance for permission. The market has already shown us that this matters. It is obvious at this point. In the first hour after the strikes, money reportedly rushed off the Iranian crypto exchanges, which is the real signal, okay? Not the first red candle or the first bounce. The real signal is when sovereign risk rises, people reach for assets that move outside of traditional bottlenecks. That is Bitcoin's wartime rule. First, it gets treated like a liquid asset, but then it gets rediscovered as to what it is. It is portable hard money. And in a world with more conflict, more debt, and more financial repression, that second role continues to get bigger. My name is Adam Livingston. I am the Bitcoin wizard. I am bullish on Bitcoin more than ever. Obviously, just look at what it's doing in these incredibly uncertain times. If you want to be positioned in Bitcoin securely and strategically before the next generational shift, Swan Private is for you, because Swan Private helps high net worth families and individuals be secured in their Bitcoin position. Talk to a team of professionals who understand Bitcoin more clearly than anybody out there. They can help you build your position along the way. Go to swan.com/NOSCbest. To learn more, please like this video and subscribe to Swan to help us spread the orange gospel of Bitcoin on the front lines with more energy than everybody every single day. If there's one thing history has shown us again and again, it's this. Moments of crisis don't just reshape borders, they reshape money. Every major conflict forces governments to make difficult decisions. How to fund it, how to sustain it, how to keep the system functioning while everything around it is under pressure. And in those moments, the true nature of money is revealed. Not the version people are told, but the version people actually experience. Rising prices, weaker purchasing power, growing uncertainty about what is truly safe. Because war doesn't just test military strength, it tests financial credibility. It tests whether people still believe in the system they rely on every day. And once that belief begins to crack, even slightly, everything starts to change. That is why moments like this matter, not just for geopolitics, but for the future of money itself. Because every crisis brings the same question back into focus. What is money supposed to be? Is it something controlled and adjusted by governments when needed? Or is it something fixed, neutral, and independent from political decisions? There may not be a simple answer, but one thing is clear. The world is becoming more complex, more connected, and at times, more unstable. And in that kind of environment, people naturally begin to look for alternatives, not out of ideology, but out of necessity, out of the need for something that feels reliable when everything else doesn't. And that is why this conversation is not going away. It is only getting louder. Because the future of money is not decided in calm times. It is decided in moments like these. So whether you believe in traditional systems or you are exploring new ones, the most important thing is to stay aware, to understand what is happening beneath the headlines. Because this is not just about one conflict, it is about a shift happening in real time. And whether we notice it or not, it is already underway. Stay informed, and I will see you in the next one.